We're going to dive into a moment in history that felt less like a political change and more like a national party.
That's a pretty good way to put it.
So imagine a country that had spent almost 20 years under this really strict military government, a time when things like laughter, bright colors, even fun itself were sort of looked down on.
Right. And then in 1660, everything changes. The King Charles II sails back from exile in France.
And his return marks the definitive end of that period, the English Commonwealth, which was led by Oliver Cromwell.
Cromwell's government was incredibly strict, puritanical, and to be honest, most people were just exhausted by it. They were sick of the military rule and the bans on, well, almost everything fun.
The descriptions of his arrival are just incredible. When Charles II landed and started making his way to London, the roads were completely flooded with people.
We're talking massive cheering crowds. People decorated the streets with flowers and tapestries. Some fountains were even said to be running with wine.
It really feels like the whole country was just taking this huge collective breath of fresh air, a return to the old ways.
It was. But Charles II was smart. He knew he couldn't just show up and act like an absolute king. He'd seen what happened to his father, after all.
So he made a really brilliant strategic move even before he got back to England.
Exactly. He issued something called the Declaration of Breda.
Okay, let's break that down. The Declaration of Breda sounds like it was designed specifically to calm everyone down after 20 years of conflict.
Yeah.
What did it actually promise?
It had three really critical guarantees. First, and maybe most important, he promised to rule with Parliament, not over it.
That's a huge deal. He's basically locking himself into a partnership from day one, promising not to be a dictator.
Absolutely. The second promise was a general pardon. Forgiveness, really. This was for almost everyone who had fought against his family.
So he was basically telling all the people who had gained power or land under Cromwell, don't worry, you can keep it, we'll just forget the past.
Precisely. It removed the main economic fear that could have started another war.
But, I mean, it couldn't have been for everyone. Surely he didn't pardon the men who, literally signed his father's death warrant.
You're right. The pardon wasn't universal. Parliament made sure that the regicides, the 59 men who signed the death warrant for Charles I, were excluded.
And what happened to them?
About 13 of them were publicly executed. It was a calculated move. Charles got to look merciful to the masses, while Parliament got the revenge people wanted. It helped make the new monarchy look legitimate.
So, with the politics settled, the country just explodes into this cultural rebirth.
Oh, instantly. Life under the Puritans meant no dancing, no sports, no Christmas celebrations. They were seen as sinful.
What was the first thing people noticed?
The theaters, they reopened almost overnight. Suddenly there was public music, festivals. It was a complete 180. If the Commonwealth was about denial, the Restoration was about enjoyment, wit, and art.
And this is where we get a truly groundbreaking social change. For the very first time in English history, women were allowed to act on stage.
It was revolutionary. Before 1660, all the female roles, even Juliet, were played by boys or young men.
Wow.
Allowing actresses completely changed drama. It brought a new realism, a new depth, and it kicked off this whole new style of witty plays called the comedy of manners.
And this change showed up in fashion too, right? You go from the plain, practical black clothes of the Puritans to these really colorful, expensive, elaborate outfits.
The king himself set that tone. Charles II was famously called the Merry Monarch. He just had this lively, approachable personality, loved parties, horse racing, good conversation, and that royal enthusiasm spread through the whole country.
But his enthusiasm wasn't just for parties. He had a real intellectual curiosity.
He did. He was just as interested in a new scientific experiment as he was in a new play.
And that curiosity leads us straight into the scientific revolution.
Right. In that same year, 1660, Charles II personally supported the founding of what we now know as the Royal Society.
So like a science club for smart people. What made it so important?
It was way more than a club. It was a formal group of scientists and thinkers, and the king gave them a royal charter. That gave them official status and, crucially, protection.
And that official protection was everything because it gave them the power to challenge old ideas. They weren't just reading what ancient scholars like Aristotle had written centuries ago.
Exactly. They adopted what we call the empirical method. The idea was simple. You don't just trust old books. You have to observe, you have to test, and you have to prove everything with an experiment.
Show your work, basically.
Show your work, exactly. And you had absolute giants of science joining this society. People like Isaac Newton with his theories on gravity and Robert Boyle, the father of modern chemistry.
Their work was covering everything, from studying the stars with new telescopes to understanding blood flow in the human body.
It fundamentally shifted how people thought about the world. Knowledge was no longer just about tradition. It was about evidence and facts you could prove.
So it's this amazing period of cultural and scientific progress. But just as London is hitting its stride, two massive disasters strike, one right after the other.
They almost wiped the city off the map. First, in 1665, was the Great Plague of London.
This is the bubonic plague, spread by fleas on rats, and London streets back then were narrow, crowded, and filthy. The perfect environment for it to spread.
The numbers are horrifying. At its peak, tens of thousands were dying every week.
It was complete chaos. You read accounts from the time, like from Samuel Pepys's diary, and it's terrifying. They'd paint a red cross on the door of an infected house with the words, "Lord, have mercy upon us."
And the rich, including the king and his court, they just fled. They left the city for the countryside, leaving London to deal with the disease.
And doctors had no idea what caused it. They thought it was bad air or something. They were completely helpless.
Yeah.
Then, just a year later, in 1666, the second disaster.
The Great Fire of London. It started in a small bakery on a street called Pudding Lane.
And because almost everything in London was built from wood and packed so tightly together, the fire it exploded.
It spread incredibly fast, pushed on by strong winds. The fire burned completely out of control for 4 days and 4 nights.
The destruction was unbelievable. Over 13,000 houses gone. 87 churches. The famous old St. Paul's Cathedral was completely destroyed.
And it's a really striking detail from history that King Charles II and his brother James were out there in the streets personally helping the firefighters, passing buckets of water. It was a huge show of leadership.
But there's a really strange silver lining to this catastrophe, isn't there?
There is. The fire was so huge and the heat was so intense that it basically sterilized large parts of the city. It burned out the slums, it killed the rats, and it killed the fleas that carried the plague.
So the fire actually ended the plague epidemic.
It did. And from those ashes, a new modern London was built. The rebuilding effort was led by the brilliant architect Christopher Wren.
And his big plan was all about safety. He insisted on wider streets to act as fire breaks, and he made a new rule. No more wooden houses. The outsides had to be built from brick or stone.
This huge project took decades. It created thousands of jobs and led to the magnificent new St. Paul's Cathedral with its giant dome. It turned London into a symbol of resilience.
Now, outside of London, Charles II's reign was also when England really started becoming a global empire.
Absolutely. This is when you see major colonial expansion in North America and the Caribbean. For instance, in 1664, the English captured a colony from the Dutch called New Amsterdam.
Which they renamed New York.
Exactly, in honor of the king's brother, James, the Duke of York.
And they were building up their navy to protect these new global trade routes. You have ships bringing back tobacco and sugar from the Americas, and the East India Company bringing back tea and spices from India. It was making a lot of merchants very, very wealthy.
It was, but we also have to acknowledge the terrible cost of that growth. This period of expansion also saw a massive, tragic expansion of the transatlantic slave trade.
So there's all this growth happening overseas, but back home, political tensions were always simmering.
Especially around religion. Charles II personally favored religious tolerance, but Parliament was terrified of him being too friendly to Catholics. His own brother James was an open Catholic.
And that fear led to Parliament passing a law called the Test Act.
Yes, in 1673. And this was a major piece of legislation. It basically said that if you wanted any kind of government or military job, you had to be a member of the official Church of England.
So it completely excluded Catholics and other religious groups from having any power. It was Parliament's way of trying to control the future of the monarchy.
And this constant tension, this fight over who should succeed Charles, created the first real political parties in English history. The Whigs and the Tories.
Okay, so the Whigs. They were the ones who wanted to legally exclude Charles's Catholic brother, James, from ever becoming king.
Right. The Whigs wanted to limit the king's power and make sure Parliament was supreme.
And the Tories were the opposite.
The Tories supported the king and the official church. They believed the line of succession was sacred and that politicians shouldn't be able to interfere with it.
And this is so important. This competition between two organized groups with totally different ideas about how the country should be run, That's the foundation for modern democracy.
It really is. You see political fights moving from the battlefield into parliament, into debates and votes.
So when we look back, Charles II's 25-year reign successfully pulled England out of the chaos of the civil wars.
It really did. It
Yeah.
set the stage for a more modern, scientifically focused, and commercial society.
He might be remembered as the Merry Monarch, but his real achievement was in helping to create that balance of power between the king and parliament. A balance that let the country grow, survive disasters, and completely redefine itself.
The Restoration was truly a period of recovery, rebirth, and fundamental change that still shapes our world today.
See you next time.